It's Friday, March 20th, 2026. Do you have friends? Many people viewing are probably thinking, of course, what a silly question. Okay, I'm pretty realistic in my expectation that not many people are going to be watching this, but let's pretend for a moment. I think many of those people would be surprised by just how many people really don't, or at least not ones who are regularly part of their lives. My answer to the question has swayed somewhat over my life. At this point, I'm an unequivocal yes, and they're really an incredibly valuable part of my life. But the friends that I've kept around haven't always been the same group of people. So let's back up as far as I can remember. In elementary school, I was spending 3 years then living in Florida, and we lived in a new development neighborhood. Back then, I do remember being on a computer from time to time, playing Reader Rabbit and Treasure Mountain from a DOS prompt on the old 386 computer, but the internet wasn't really around then. And I remember spending a lot of time outside and exploring both on bicycle and foot, usually with at least one partner in crime. I remember exploring with friends quite a bit. Again, the neighborhood we were living in was still under construction in places, so we would explore the construction sites and the woodlands around us, looking for and finding all manner of lizard, spider, and alligator. Truly a great place to be an 8-year-old boy, and finding others who wanted to go adventuring through places like the nature preserve Devil's Sinkhole that the neighborhood was up against was not hard at all. Fast forward a bit to my middle school years. We moved from Central Florida up to Minnesota, of all places, living in the same house that my parents are living in today. The neighborhood wasn't nearly as fun to explore, and while I do remember spending some time outside, I remember bonding with neighborhood friends that I had by playing Super Nintendo at their house or watching The Simpsons at their place, which was banned in my house. At school, I remember trying to make friends, but middle school is not always a kind place for the feelings of the kids there, myself included. And I remember specifically a few failed attempts. In particular, I remember trying to join a friend group of boys who ended up talking behind my back and denigrating me on the regular, and decided that I wasn't going to be the butt of their jokes and cut all ties. I was a year younger than my peers since I skipped second grade, and that did not make it any easier to make friends in my preteen years. I remember not putting up with it, and generally landing on not being part of that unkind group as being better than being part of the in group. I don't know if that was the driver, but in high school, I had acquaintances from many social circles rather than finding and sticking to one core group of people. The smart kids, for example, recognized me as smart. I was in the same AP classes and I got the grades, but I wasn't particularly close to any of them personally. I did theater, but I never identified myself as a theater kid. The friends I was closest to in high school were, in a lot of ways, social outcasts. We played tabletop role-playing games together, Dungeons and Dragons and Vampire the Masquerade. I remember probably the most trouble I ever got into with my parents back then was because I broke curfew coming home in the wee hours of the night after tabletop gaming with my friends. There wasn't any alcohol involved in my high school social life. It was Mountain Dew and Cheetos, probably. The other guys in that group that I played these games with generally came from less stable home lives than I did. They included a closeted and conflicted gay kid, another kid who had so much animosity between him and his father that he would try to be anywhere but home, and a guy who valued nonconformity as a virtue, who also had to struggle with his dad's white-collar career crashing and burning while he was in high school. When I went off to college, even though it wasn't an hour away from home in the Twin Cities, it was a social reset. I chose initially to live in the super block student dorms at the University of Minnesota, which was a block of 4 dorm buildings on campus, as opposed to the honors dorm, despite the fact that I was in the College of IT honors program. It didn't work out that well. I despised my first freshman roommate. I remember him using my fridge to store his illicit beers without my permission or okay. I remember his coming home one night and describing the very obvious retail pyramid scheme he'd gotten suckered into, and his complete and angry denial when I addressed it as such. One of the more ridiculous stories I have was when some drunk girl came into our dorm room at night and squatted over and peed in my mesh trash can. That was wild enough, but then that roommate reported a day or two later that he had taken it upon himself to, and successfully did, track down that girl and solicit her for sex. So I was elated when I made a friend in a freshman seminar titled The Physics of Game Design. He was living in the honors dorm across campus and had a similarly slimy roommate that he did not care for. So we ended up swapping. I moved over to the honors dorm, and that friend is one I kept for life. I attended his wedding probably a decade or so ago now in the Pacific Northwest, and I remember cracking up when before the ceremony the song Baba Yetu, which was the title theme for Civilization 4, came on. That was a game that was released and that we had both played while we were living in the dorms together in my latter half of my freshman year. The friends I made in the honors dorm in my freshman and sophomore years were great, and I've seen them every couple of years. More influential since then, however, were friends I met playing World of Warcraft during the next couple of years. By then, of course, we're fully in the internet age, and meeting and interacting with these folks was largely by way of voice chat and virtual avatars. I largely swore off World of Warcraft when I moved from university to my early working years, but I kept in regular touch with those guys to the present day. Just talked with two of them last night. In 2010, I packed up everything I owned the year after I graduated from college, stuffed it into the new car that I bought on credit with a job offer letter as collateral, and I moved down to Kansas City. I made a few friends in the workplace with some of the folks I started with, and I will credit that entirely to the social graces of those friends, not to myself. Drinking, especially at the dive bar just off campus after work, was the social glue of that young post-collegiate work culture. I am still grateful to the friend who yelled at me while I was walking to my car in the work parking lot after one of the first days in the office to come to the bar, while I had every intention of just going home to my very empty apartment. While I was very open to putting down roots in Kansas City, it just didn't happen. After a few years, I felt a strong pull to go back home to Minnesota, and I did just that. I first lived with an old high school friend of mine, but living together simply did not work out. Maybe a year after coming back, I made one of the best friendships I've ever had, though, when I joined a couple of my sisters in many of their large social network that had all come from their time in a co-ed fraternity at the University of Minnesota several years after I had gone to school. Turns out, if you can live in harmony with a stranger on a multi-day canoe trip, they won't remain a stranger for too long. In 2019, we created a Discord server that ended up growing explosively. Technically, the server was and still is our Warframe clan server. However, I think I'm the only one who really ever regularly played Warframe. Instead, what linked that community together was collaboration largely on the production side of the Minneapolis electronic music scene. When COVID hit and everybody was trapped inside, we generally grew closer, largely by way of that online space. It's a diverse mix of people, but frankly, they're my closest IRL friends, and I'm pretty pumped to be going to celebrate one of their birthdays at a self-hosted birthday concert tonight. Now, I started by asking you, the camera, or rather the viewer, whether you had friends, because there are some key people in my life who might not have such an easy answer to that. First and foremost is my dad. While the man is the very model of a responsible father, the closest thing I've seen to him having friends are fellow members of his church community. Throughout my childhood, he spent about 11 hours a day, either working or commuting during the week. He's somebody who is as introverted as I am, and has spent his very little free time, usually late at night after most of his family were in bed, playing guitar or browsing internet forums dedicated to his favorite sports team. Friendships don't come naturally to everybody, and I'm one of those people. Without some of the more gregarious people in my life who took the effort to scoop me out of my shell, I might not have answered yes to the question I started with. And I might have been a very different person as a result. All that to say, I hope that you have great friendships in your life. In fact, you should let them know that it means a lot to you to be their friend, and back it up with specifics if you can. And if you don't, well, don't lose hope. It's never too late to make some.